Fireside Tales. Hello, I'm Merlin, Mililli. Welcome to my fireside, where I tell weird tales. And I drink coffee. I drink coffee from my skull cup because I'm a deadhead. So I don't know if you all know what a deadhead is, but a deadhead is someone who likes the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead is a 60s blues-based rock band. They sort of left the blues behind as they ventured into the future. Now the living remaining members are in Dead and Company, though Billy Kreutzmann, who was their original drummer, stopped touring with Dead and Company, and now he's got this cool new thing called Mahalo Dead, which is really cool, and he has an excellent female singer, and she's really good, and it's really good. Anywho, so that's why I drink from my skull mug. But every week here at Fireside Tales, we talk about reincarnation. And I have, personally, a reincarnation connection with the Grateful Dead, the band. And the Grateful Dead got their name from well, they were originally called the Warlocks, but then who eventually came to be known as the Velvet Underground also went by the Warlocks. So they were like, no, we got to get a new name. And there was a Funkin' Wagnalls dictionary at Phil Lesch's house, and Jerry Garcia thumbed through it and found the Grateful Dead. And what Jerry found in the Funkin' Wagnalls dictionary was describing a set of stories in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead was written in Sanskrit. I don't know that it's been totally even translated to this day. But every week here at Fireside Tales, I tell the story of the Grateful Dead. Squeaky, please be quiet. We're recording. Cats don't really get that. So, just a minute. Put the cat out. He was going to be problematic, I could tell. So, Anywho, it was distracting to me. I couldn't keep a thought in my head with him meowing like that. He's got issues. He's diabetic. We're trying to figure out his insulin, and it's really insane, time-consuming, money-consuming. Insulin for a cat is really freaking expensive. Anywho, I was told the story of the Grateful Dead by Grateful Fred, who actually was the first person to play Grateful Dead for me, which opened a whole can of worms that I didn't realize was even there in this lifetime. And he also told me the story of the Grateful Dead. Fred's parents were professors, I think at Yale. I want to say Yale. It was in Connecticut. We lived in Shelton, Connecticut, and I went to high school with Fred, and we used to call him Grateful Fred because he really liked the Grateful Dead, and he knew the story of the Grateful Dead because he'd read it in Sanskrit, because he knew how to read and write in Sanskrit because his parents taught ancient languages at the college level in Yale, I believe. I believe it was Yale. Jowdy. Professors Jowdy, they would have been. So I don't know if anybody wants to look it up. Knock yourselves out. So, excuse me. One more second. Not only my cat wanted to disrupt this recording, I think my cat and my daughter's boyfriend are in cahoots. Anyhow, I'm not used to having a full house here or anyone here while I'm making Fireside Tales. This is my house where I live and my kids live, and so there's goings on while I'm creating. So I was told the story of the Grateful Dead as it should be told, by a fire, told by a deadhead, as I'm going to tell the story to you, by a fire, told by a deadhead. We'll just go ahead with that now. Get into all the other stuff as soon as I'm done. Once, long, long ago, there was a traveler. It was so long ago that the traveler traveled on foot. Because I'm telling the story, I make her a she. So we're going with she. And one day, the traveler, while traveling along, she happened upon a village. And in the village, there was a little crowd. As she got closer, she realized that the crowd was squabbling, arguing. As she got closer still, she found that the crowd was arguing quite literally over a dead body. There was a dead body laying there, and there was a crowd arguing over who was going to pay his debts, over who was going to bury him, over who was going to pay for that burial. And the traveler thought the townspeople, the villages people were gross. She thought their arguing over the dead body was disrespectful and gross. So she stopped them. And she paid the dead man's debts. And she paid for a proper burial. And she prayed over his grave. And she traveled on. And then one day, many years later, decades later, she happened upon a life or death situation in which, out of nowhere, some stranger just scooped her up and saved her life. She stopped the stranger and said, "Who are you? Thank you. Where did you come from? Why did you save my life?" And the stranger simply said, "I am the Grateful Dead." You see, it was the dead man, reincarnated. He'd been born in a baby body and grew up and lived a life remembering that that traveler had saved his death, in a sense. I have theories about the body because of the story, about the soul being able to move on only, perhaps, this is my theory, only if somebody prays over it, over the body. Like, they can only be separated if there's a prayer. Otherwise, the soul might go with the body or stay with the body. And that is no good. No one needs that. So, every week here at Fireside Tales, I also talk about my book in the Akashic Records. The Akashic Records are an ancient library. Or it is an ancient library. Records are. Anywho, you can only reach this library through meditation. It's a metaphysical library. It's there, but it's not here. It's on the spiritual plane. So, every soul has a book in the Akashic Records. And your book in the Akashic Records holds record of who you have been, when you have been, and where you have been. Your soul's journey. So, if you've been reincarnated, you have a larger book. If you haven't been reincarnated, you have kind of a shiny little tiny book. I generally only look at my book in the Akashic Records. I go with my spirit guides. This is sort of transcendental meditation, so it takes a little caution to get there. And I was given a key when I was like 16, when I first started meditating. I did a meditation on the High Priestess card in the Tarot deck, And the high priestess gave me a key. And she told me it was for the Akashic Records. And then I found like all this literature on the Akashic Records, and I wasn't the only person to ever hear of the Akashic Records. And I clearly wasn't the only person who had a book there, because there's millions and millions of books. So my book in the Akashic Records has threads that carry over from one life to the next, things that connect each life to each other life. And one of my threads is fire. Another of my threads is fire safety. It's always been super important to me to keep my fire, safe. I always have water up here. I have water here in a cup. I have water in a sprayer around the corner. If you make a fire outside, you'll want to make sure that there's no overhanging branches where you're going to make the fire. You also want to dig a pit and line it with stones, and then line that with stones. And then you can build a fire in it if you have a bucket of water or a water source like a hose right nearby, and you want to keep the hose on so that in case you need it, you can spray things down. Then if you're out in the middle of the woods, you still need a bucket of water, and then you'll want a shovel so that you could actually put a fire out with dirt a lot easier and quicker than with water a lot of times. And if you're out on the fringes of society, off grid or whatever, and you don't have access to a lot of fresh water, then you want to use like used water, dishwater, or something like that, or just have a bucket of water. Anywho, so I live in California now, and every day is a fire hazard here. So I personally ask that everyone be careful, no matter where you are, with fire. It's always been hazardous, but these days, with the earth heating up, things catch a lot easier, and there's been a lot of droughts. Things get really dry, and then they catch a lot easier. Just be careful out there. So, another of my threads has obviously been meditation. And I've always been meditating, and oftentimes I did it by a fire back in the day. Now, not so much. But smudging is one of my threads also. And smudging is something you want to do before meditating. I like to do smudging and grounding before I meditate, and I've always been this way. Like, this is something that's in my soul, and no one had to teach me. I just instinctively started doing it, and then I started reading that what I was doing was what everyone else was doing. Maybe because I've been doing it for centuries. But maybe other people have been also doing it for centuries. Nonetheless, this is sage, dried sage in a bundle. It's called a smudge stick. And what you do is you light it, and the smoke from the sage is aura cleansing. So it cleanses your aura. So it cleans out all the negative stuff that gets stuck in your aura from other people or other stuff or other things going on. Or let's not talk about negative things. We're clearing the negative. Bringing in the positive. So that's basically all you do. You just kind of smudge your aura. It cleanses it. That's why I like to have a cup of water by the smudge stick, so I can just put it out and it doesn't create a fire hazard. So the other part of smudging to prepare for meditation or ritual or reading, I read tarot and runes. The other part of that is grounding. You want to ground, which is a breathing exercise. It's more for cleansing out the negative of your insides. Well, the smudge stick cleared out the negative of your outsides. The grounding clears the negative from your insides. So it's a breathing exercise. So you breathe out all the negative. Excuse me. And then you breathe in positive and you think an uber positive thought. And then you breathe out positive. It just creates an atmosphere to get the most positive results from your meditations, from your rituals, from your readings. So I advise getting the most positive results. The world is negative enough. You don't need to throw in weird negative stuff that isn't real into your readings or your meditations or your rituals. So, smudging is very important, and it dates back to ancient times. People have been doing it. I've been doing it since ancient times. So, in my book, we've been discussing ancient times, which are in the beginning of my book, obviously. But my book has this strange watermark, and it separates from the beginning from the end, obviously. It's like in the middle, roughly. And the beginning part of my book is light and dry and sandy, and my lives are long, really, really long, like thousands of years, strangely long. Then there's a watermark, which I think marks the Great Flood. And after the watermark, everything is dark and wet and muddy, and my lives are much shorter. Much shorter. Like, not even, 50 to 75. I didn't even get to 30 most of my lives in the latter part of my book. So, like I said, I think that watermark marks the Great Flood. So we've been discussing the part before the Great Flood with the longer lives and the ancient times. And we've been in ancient Egypt this season 4 of Fireside Tales. And we're going to be discussing the life of Hatshepsut all season, but today in particular. Another of my threads is that I've been a psychic medium every life in my book. even if I didn't know it or understand it, I communicated with spirits. I still communicate with spirits regularly, probably more than I communicate with humans, with maybe the exception of this show and the love show, if you count this as communication with humans. So, the spirit realm, the spirits in the spirit realm have thoughts on reincarnation, which I used to call a theory, but it's really been so long, and I've had so many spirits agree on this that I don't think it's a theory anymore. I think it's an actual thing. But the spirits think that when a soul has been reincarnated, that it only happens upon being murdered. Like if you're murdered, you get to come back and try again. If that is the case, which I believe it is, I've been murdered a lot. My book is big and dusty and old and watermarked. So I'm inclined to believe that. Stones are another of my threads, not just for fires, but for energy and all kinds of things. In ancient Egypt, I believe they moved the stones with sound. Now, the stars are also another thread. So, stars and stones. And given that we're in ancient Egypt, I'll go into this now. Today we're discussing what I know personally about Hatshepsut. I know she didn't call herself that. But I believe, I know actually, that the pyramids, they weren't built in the time of Hatshepsut, but she did a lot of building. And she also had these priest kings and priests and kings that were under her, and every pharaoh. And they sort of were like her cabinet. They helped her run things. And they stayed in power where the pharaoh came and went and became different people, but the priest kings were always there. And in this lifetime, I was moving some stones, and the priest kings came to me meditatively for some reason. Well, for this reason, because they told me that if I hummed anything, any tune, that the stones would be easier to lift if I hummed while I lifted them. And I tried it, and you can try it at home. I mean, just get a stone that's kind of hard to lift, okay? And then try lifting it without humming first. And then try lifting it while humming. And there's a huge difference. A huge difference. It's so much easier when humming. There has to be, I know there's a connection between the pyramids and sound, creating those. Also, the stars, they paid very close attention to the stars. Excuse me. So much so that the pyramids, the Great Pyramids at Giza, line up with Orion, the constellation. Orion's belt. They're in exact alignment with Orion's belt. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but they're not quite in a straight line. One of them is slightly off from the other two, and that's how the pyramids are. So, and that's what Orion does as well. So these pyramids were made of stone, but I believe that the ancient Egyptians also used crystals and light and water and gold. And they also used electrum, which is a combination of silver and gold, to create power. I think that the pyramids were not tombs, but were power generators. I believe they also used electric eels. I don't know if you've ever seen, but there's this one scene carved in ancient Egypt that they show on all the documentaries, but they never really hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned with what's going on in this. There's like a bulb, right? There's a snake in the bulb, and there's people holding up this bulb. It looks like a light bulb. And the snake, I believe, is an electric eel. And electric eels light up. They're electric. So I think the reason why there's no soot on the inside of the pyramids is because there was no burning of anything in there. They created energy with water and sunlight and gold and crystals and electrum, which, like I said, is a mixture of silver and gold. Hatshepsut had built the Temple of Amun, and in it there were two giant pink obelisks carved with her story and that of Amun, her god. And the tops of them were covered with electrum. And there was this water that ran through the whole place. The whole temple had this little water canal. And they even showed on one of the documentaries I watched and said that Hatshepsut would have used a golden vessel to pour water into this little carved out stream in stone that ran through the whole temple, which started with her pouring it, and then it would run through the whole temple and it would light up the whole place with light and, I think, electricity and energy. They had batteries. They found batteries that run on like juice and vinegar or something. But they had electricity. I know this in my heart of hearts and in my soul. Because in my book, according to my book, I was Hatshepsut in a past life. So I don't believe the pyramids are tombs. I don't think they ever were, and I know that I've talked about, I think in our first show of this season, how the pharaohs all kept, until Hatshepsut, the pharaohs all kept lions as pets. Lots of lions. They had lions all over the place. And I remember, like, scritching their ears and rubbing their bellies like they were dogs, like they were family. We named them. I named a few. My father named a few. But I also discussed in our first episode of this season that someone came in the night and poisoned and killed all of our lions. And that was the point at which, and they ransacked the palace and ransacked some of the tombs that we had near the pyramids, but they weren't in the pyramids. I don't think anyone's ever really been buried. It wasn't a sarcophagus that was in there. The cement or stone basin that is in the Great Pyramid that people think made it a tomb is the exact specifications of the Ark of the Covenant from the Bible. The exact specs. The Ark of the Covenant would have fit in there nicely, but a body wouldn't have. It's kind of short for a body. Like, it would have had been really small king in there. I don't think even Tutankhamun would have fit in there. Excuse me. So, last week we went through what we know about Hatshepsut. And this week we're going through what I know about Hatshepsut. And I hinted last week at her baby daddy being her architect. Now, some people say that her stepson was her baby daddy, but he was too young when her daughter was born, and they hated each other. And she was married to her brother briefly, but that brother died, and he was just a boy. That was like to maybe train him to be pharaoh. And she would have been like a, queen, concubine, wife, but not a pharaoh. And she did become pharaoh, and she was the first, as far as I can find, the first female pharaoh in ancient Egypt. And she ruled for over 20 years with a peaceable, functioning, well-working society. And she built tons of architecture. And the only reason we know as much as we know about her is because of all this architecture that she built. And her architect is the man that I know was her daughter's father. Now, he was an architect. He had been an architect for her father, for Hatshepsut's father, the pharaoh. And then he became her architect when she inherited the pharaoh's throne. And then, for some reason, he tutored her daughter, Neferyuri. Neferyuri? Neferyuri. That's the daughter's name. And so, at this time in history, it wasn't unusual for a man to tutor. It just was unusual for a man as high up in the pharaoh hierarchy to tutor some random girl that had no connection to him. Now, Hatshepsut and Senema, her architect, couldn't be together because he was not a pharaoh. He was not in line to be a pharaoh. He just worked for the pharaoh. So they couldn't be together. It was against the rules. But for some reason, she could be with her brother, which he was in line for the pharaoh. I think that was the only reason. But like I said, he died, and then her stepbrother was too young, or her stepson was too young to take the throne at that time. So she took the throne, and she ruled. And there's like even graffiti, weird carved into stone graffiti of Hatshepsut and Senema having sex. So I think they did, and I know they did, and I know that Neferyuri was their daughter. And I also know that the Sphinx had a lion's face originally. I think they carved it off. Some pharaoh decided that it needed a facelift, and that it needed a human face rather than a lion's face, because once our lions were gone, no one understood the whole lion concept. But the Sphinx had a lion's face, and it was looking up at the stars, because there's a lot in all of that architecture involved in the stars. The stars are the stars of that show. Very much so. So the last thing I know for sure is that Hatshepsut was murdered. Not just by the spirit realm's thoughts on reincarnation, but because I know it's being murdered is just something that your soul doesn't really forget. And she was murdered horribly by her stepson. And he took the throne immediately following. So I know he murdered her for the throne. So the other thing we do here at Fireside Tales every week is I sing Deja Vu. It's a song by David Crosby, and it's the only song besides the one I wrote called Reincarnation. It's the only song I know that's even remotely about reincarnation. And I wrote a song, like I said, called Reincarnation, and I started singing it, and then I sang it once, I think, and then David Crosby died. So I've been singing Deja Vu just in honor of David Crosby. So here we go. would probably know just what to do. Don't you? If I had ever been here before and another time around the wheel, I would probably know just how to deal with all of you. And I feel like I've been here before. Like I've been here before, and you know, it makes me wonder what's going on. Under the ground. Do you know? Don't you wonder? What's going on down under you? La da da, la da da, la da da da, la da 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 da. We have all been here before. 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 Murdered, for sure. So, that's about it for me today. Next week we'll still be discussing Hatshepsut, different aspects of her life. And so join us next week and have a weird and wonderful weekend. Thanks for watching. A Mililli Studios production.